Before the iPhone, before the iPod, and long before Apple became the trillion-dollar empire we know today, there was this. A strange, chunky gray camera sitting on a table. It had no screen, barely any memory, and a price tag that made people's wallets run for the hills. It was called the Apple QuickTake, one of the very first consumer digital cameras ever made. Back in 1994, it was supposed to change the world. Instead, it became one of Apple's most spectacular failures, a product that arrived too soon, was far too expensive, and was completely misunderstood. Yet, hidden inside this story of failure is something truly incredible. Because this little camera didn't just fail, it accidentally paved the way for the digital photography revolution that would eventually change everything. This is the forgotten story of the Apple camera that nobody wanted, and how it might just be the most important failure in the company's history. In the early 1990s, photography was a physical, chemical process. You'd carefully load a roll of film, take your shots, and then wait for days to get them developed at a lab. The whole idea of a digital camera, one that could capture images electronically, sounded like science fiction outside of high-tech research labs. Computers were painfully slow, memory was incredibly expensive, and most people didn't even have a PC in their homes. But at Apple, a group of forward-thinking engineers and designers were already dreaming of the future. They believed that one day, all photography would be digital. People would take pictures, store them on computers, and share them instantly across the globe. It sounded absolutely insane in 1993, but Apple decided to make it real anyway. So, Apple partnered with Kodak and Fujifilm, two giants of the photography world, to create a device that could bring digital imaging to the masses. The result, launched in 1994, was the Apple QuickTake 100. It looked like a futuristic pair of binoculars, compact, gray, and minimalist. It was capable of taking just 8 photos at its highest resolution. 8. All stored on its tiny internal memory. Each image was a mere 640x480 pixels, which is less than 1/3 of the quality of a selfie from a modern smartphone. And here's the kicker. There was no screen. You couldn't preview your shots, you couldn't edit them, and you couldn't delete them. To see your pictures, you had to physically connect the camera to a Mac computer with a clunky serial cable, and then use special software to download them. It was awkward, it was slow, and it cost $749. That's over $400 in today's money. But for all its flaws, it was revolutionary. Because in 1994, this was one of the very first digital cameras you could actually go out and buy. The Apple QuickTake was a perfect vision of the future, but there was one huge problem. The future hadn't arrived yet. The world simply wasn't ready. Most people didn't own a personal computer. Those who did had nowhere near enough storage to handle digital images. The internet was just a baby, social media didn't exist, and email attachments were limited to a few kilobytes. So, what was the point of a camera that produced digital photos if you had absolutely nothing to do with them? Reviewers at the time praised its innovation, but consumers were just confused. It was a product designed for a digital lifestyle that was still more than a decade away. Simply put, Apple was too early. And in business, being too early is often worse than being wrong. By the mid-1990s, Apple was in serious trouble. The company that had once been a beacon of innovation was losing its spark and bleeding money. Between 1995 and 1997, Apple threw everything at the wall, launching dozens of different products, printers, handheld devices, and of course cameras, desperately trying to find a hit. But most of them, including the QuickTake, failed to catch on. The entire QuickTake series, the 100, 150, and 200 models, sold fewer than 50,000 units combined. It was an innovative idea, but it was completely unprofitable. It became a symbol of Apple's identity crisis. And then, in 1997, Steve Jobs returned to the company he co-founded. One of his very first moves was to clean house. He ruthlessly killed off product lines he considered junk, things that were distracting Apple from its true mission. The QuickTake was one of the first to go. For most people, that was the end of the story. Apple's digital camera experiment was just a forgotten footnote, but the ideas behind it were just getting started. When Steve Jobs returned, he refocused Apple on simplicity, on making just a few great products instead of many mediocre ones. But here's the twist. Many of the engineers and designers who had worked on the QuickTake went on to develop Apple's biggest future innovations. The QuickTake wasn't just a failure, it was a training ground for the future. It gave Apple critical experience with digital imaging, compact electronics, and human-computer interaction. The very same skills that would lead directly to the iPhone's revolutionary camera system more than a decade later. In fact, when Apple launched the first iPhone in 2007, Steve Jobs introduced it as a device that combined a phone, an iPod, and an internet communicator. But it also had something else, a camera. A camera that would eventually redefine photography for an entire generation. From the QuickTake's awkward beginnings to the iPhone's elegance, Apple's journey shows that even the biggest failures can plant the seeds of future greatness. Today, the Apple QuickTake is a collector's item, a quirky relic from a time when digital cameras felt like something out of a sci-fi movie. It represents that rare moment in history when a company dared to invent something far too soon. The QuickTake wasn't sleek, it wasn't fast, and it certainly wasn't a commercial success. But it was bold. It proved that Apple's DNA has always been about one thing: creating the future before anyone even knows to ask for it. And while the world may have laughed at the QuickTake back then, Apple learned a vital lesson. Technology isn't just about what's possible, it's about what people are ready for. When the world finally caught up, Apple was waiting, and this time, it changed everything. In the end, Apple didn't really fail with the QuickTake. It just took a picture of the future, long before anyone else could see it. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this look back at forgotten tech, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories. We'll see you in the next one.